February 25th, 1977. A pale dawn creeps over the undulating hills of South Australia. The airport lies quiet, save for the hum of ground vehicles and distant turbine idling. A McDonnell Douglas DC-9 rests at the gate, polished silver glinting in the early light, engines dormant but ready. The passengers, unaware of the day's unfolding events, settle into their seats. Outside, low clouds gather along the horizon. A chill wind sweeps across the tarmac, rustling terminal flags. The smell of aviation fuel mixes with damp earth, a quiet reminder of both technology and nature in constant negotiation. In the cockpit, the flight crew runs through pre-flight checks. The rhythm of switches, gauges, and clipped radio calls is meticulous, almost ceremonial. Each movement reflects experience, discipline, and the strict procedural culture of 1970s aviation. The DC-9, a workhorse of short to medium routes, hums with latent power, its systems waiting to be engaged. As the plane begins its taxi, the sunlight fractures against its fuselage. Shadows stretch across the runway, marking the first stirrings of a journey that will end in tragedy. There is no hint yet, only the disciplined calm of preparation, the delicate tension of weather, machinery, and human judgment poised together. Silence holds its own weight. In these early moments, the narrative of a disaster is written not in chaos, but in the careful unfolding of ordinary events, the slow tightening of a chain that will soon be tested beyond its limits. In 1977, Australia's domestic aviation network was a growing, tightly regulated system. The South Australian routes serve as both commercial travelers and regional connections, a critical artery linking Adelaide to smaller towns. Airlines relied on aircraft like the McDonnell Douglas DC-9 for their combination of speed, reliability, and short-field performance. The DC-9, first introduced in the mid-1960s, was a twin-engine jet designed for short to medium-haul operations. Its fuselage was narrow, seating typically between 90 and 115 passengers, with rear-mounted engines providing a quieter cabin but unique handling characteristics. This particular DC-9 had been in service for over a decade. Routine maintenance logs indicated compliance with regulatory standards, though the aircraft systems reflected the technology of the era: inertial navigation aids, limited automation, and manual cockpit procedures that demanded constant crew vigilance. Avionics were functional but lacked the advanced terrain awareness systems modern pilots now take for granted. Flight crews depended heavily on radio beacons, visual cues, and precise procedural adherence. The crew assigned to this flight were experienced, with several thousand hours between them. Both had flown in South Australia's variable weather conditions before, but 1970s cockpit culture emphasized hierarchy, protocol, and the limits of human endurance. Fatigue, environmental stress, and operational pressure were latent factors, invisible in the routine rhythms of pre-flight checks. South Australian weather, particularly in late summer, could be deceptive. Rapidly changing cloud layers, gust fronts, and thermals created complex wind patterns. Pilots often had to reconcile instrument readings with visual perceptions, a challenge compounded when visibility was partially obscured by low clouds or rising mist. Aviation in this region required constant situational awareness and strict adherence to approach and departure procedures. Understanding the environment, aircraft, and crew is essential to grasp how a seemingly ordinary flight could confront the limits of human judgment, technical design, and atmospheric variability. This context frames the intricate interplay of factors that would converge on that February morning. The DC-9 is deceptively compact yet complex. Its rear-mounted Pratt & Whitney JT8D engines provide efficient thrust, but their positions shift the aircraft's center of gravity rearward. Pilots must compensate during takeoff, climb, and approach, especially in crosswinds or turbulent conditions. The aircraft's flaps, Leading-edge devices and hydraulic systems require precise coordination, particularly during approach in variable weather. In 1977, cockpit automation was minimal. Navigation depended on VOR stations, NDBs, and dead reckoning, requiring constant attention. Autopilot systems could maintain heading or altitude, but terrain awareness remained the pilot's responsibility. The crew were skilled professionals, yet their effectiveness relied on human memory, communication, and procedural discipline. The captain, commanding authority, carried decades of cumulative experience, while the first officer monitored systems and cross-checked readings. Together, they formed a hierarchical yet collaborative cockpit dynamic. Fatigue, recent operational demands, and the cognitive load of managing both instruments and weather cues created subtle pressures invisible to passengers. South Australia's weather that day compounded the challenge. Low cloud bases obscured visual references, while gust fronts introduced rapid changes in airspeed and heading. Pilots face a dual task: maintain safe separation from terrain while adhering to procedural constraints. The atmospheric tension was not violent. It was quiet, insidious. A small misjudgment, a delayed correction, or a misread instrument could escalate within seconds. Systems, though reliable, had operational limits. Hydraulic response times, flap deployment sequences, and engine thrust curves could not compensate for situational misalignment. The aircraft's design expected trained crews to anticipate environmental and mechanical nuances. It was in this space, where human decision-making, aircraft capability, and environmental conditions intersect, that risk silently accumulated. Understanding these angles, aircraft, crew, environment, and systems, is crucial. Each alone is manageable. Together, they form a delicate equilibrium. On that February flight, the balance will be tested beyond its margin, with small deviations compounding into an irreversible chain of events. The DC-9 departed on schedule, climbing smoothly into a sky streaked with early morning clouds. The engines hummed steadily, flight instruments stable, crew focused. Yet the environment had already begun to assert its subtle influence. Low cloud banks masked the terrain ahead, while gust fronts nudged the aircraft off its intended heading. Small deviations accumulated, unnoticed amidst routine radio checks and procedural adherence. As the aircraft approached the final approach segment, the margin for error narrowed. The captain called out altitudes and headings. The first officer monitored instruments, cross-referencing with radio beacons. Both relied on a combination of visual cues and navigation aids, but the low clouds obscured the ground, and the rapid terrain changes of South Australia's hills offered few forgiving visual references. A critical moment arrived when the aircraft descended slightly below the recommended glide path. Instrument readings indicated minor fluctuations in airspeed and altitude, but nothing outside operational tolerance. The crew adjusted, yet the combination of gusting winds, limited terrain awareness, and the absence of advanced warning systems meant that each correction brought only incremental alignment. The DC-9, designed to respond predictably within control parameters, had no capacity to alert the crew to the imminent proximity of rising terrain. In the final seconds, a chain of small, almost imperceptible miscalculations converged. Heading corrections lagged slightly, altitude adjustments came a fraction too late, and the aircraft systems responded within design limits. But the human factor, pressed against environmental uncertainty, could not compensate quickly enough. The DC-9 contacted terrain in a controlled flight path, but an elevation incompatible with survival. Impact was immediate, precise, and catastrophic, yet completely devoid of dramatic cinematic flair. There was no explosion, no fireball, only the stark finality of mechanical consequence and situational misjudgment. The accident was not sudden chaos. It was a methodical failure of margin, a quiet unraveling of equilibrium between pilot, machine, and environment. The narrative is one of accumulation, small deviations, unremarked, leading inexorably to a tragic outcome. The immediate aftermath of the crash was a study in methodical response. Emergency services arrived as quickly as conditions allowed, navigating the undulating terrain and residual weather. The sight, though tragic, offered vital clues. Flight instruments, cockpit recordings, and wreckage distribution provided a map of the final moments. Investigators from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau and airline specialists began the painstaking work of reconstruction, documenting every detail with precision. Analysis revealed a chain of contributing factors. The DC-9's descent below the recommended glide path, influenced by gusting winds and obscured visual references, emerged as central. Instruments had functioned within design parameters. The aircraft systems had performed as intended. Human factors, environmental complexity, and procedural limitations intersected to create an unanticipated outcome. The absence of terrain awareness systems, now standard in modern aircraft, was noted as a key vulnerability. The investigation also examined cockpit dynamics and operational culture. Flight crew decisions reflected training and protocol, yet cognitive load and subtle fatigue played a role. Approach procedures were technically sound but did not fully account for the variability of South Australian topography under low cloud conditions. Each finding underscored the complexity of aviation safety. It is rarely a single failure, but the accumulation of factors that defines risk. The impact extended beyond the immediate loss. Airlines reviewed approach charts, flight training, and procedural redundancies. Regulatory authorities implemented stricter standards for approach minima in challenging terrain, and technology began to evolve, anticipating hazards before human detection. Industry-wide, the lessons from this accident informed not only procedural adjustments but a cultural shift toward risk awareness, margin management, and the proactive use of emerging avionics. Even years later, the event remains a reference point in aviation training. It illustrates the fragile balance between aircraft performance, environmental forces, and human decision-making. The tragedy compelled the industry to examine its assumptions, tighten safety protocols, and embrace technologies that would prevent similar outcomes. The 1977 South Australian DC-9 crash left a quiet but enduring imprint on aviation. Its lessons were not written in headlines or dramatic imagery, but in procedures, checklists, and the evolution of technology. The tragedy highlighted the limits of human perception, the subtlety of environmental hazards, and the importance of systems designed to compensate for both. Following the investigation, regulatory authorities mandated more conservative approach minima in areas of complex terrain. Airlines incorporated repeated simulation training for crews, emphasizing situational awareness and decision-making under variable weather. The development and eventual implementation of ground proximity warning systems, GPWS, and terrain awareness technologies were accelerated, informed directly by incidents like this one. Pilots and engineers carried these lessons forward, encoded in procedural memory, in the design of aircraft, and in the culture of vigilance. Modern crews, using advanced avionics and real-time terrain alerts, operate in a safer environment, yet the fundamental truth remains. Aviation safety is a delicate equilibrium of human skill, environmental understanding, and mechanical reliability. For passengers, the memory of the crash is a reminder of the silent rigor that underpins every flight. For the industry, it is a symbol of continuous improvement, an acknowledgement that even in tragedy, knowledge gained preserves countless lives. The legacy of the 1977 South Australian DC-9 is subtle, reflective, and instructive. It is not measured in spectacle, but in calm procedures, disciplined training, and technological safeguards. The narrative ends not with shock, but with the quiet authority of lessons learned and the vigilance that now defines modern aviation.